Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is your host, Kate. Something I was never comfortable with as an HR leader was getting the call asking for team building. You know, icebreakers and games and 20 minutes of trust exercises. In fact, we used to refer to these as the fix my people requests. Because that's the thing. So many times when a team isn't working well together, the leader thinks something about the team needs to be fixed. Here's the other thing. They're not wrong. Something does need fixed. But it's usually not the people. It's often the leader. When a leader encounters performance problems that are based in teamwork, chances are they have failed to build the best environment for people to work together. See, my discomfort isn't about team building per se. It's about what so many leaders think it is. Building a team is a vital act of leadership. Sometimes it can involve icebreakers, but more often it involves intentional planning, strategic hiring, and careful decision making. In fact, I like to think of it more as architecture than as building. There's some real-world challenges to consider, though. Not every leader has the chance to start from the ground up planning their team. Most of us inherit teams with their own histories and existing issues. Others may experience circumstances that make planning the team structure seem like a luxury they don't have time for. So if the answer isn't team building, what are the mindsets and practices that will help any leader craft a high-performing team? I'm looking forward to today's conversation, in part because my guest brings both his perspective as a business owner and the lessons he's learned while mountain climbing. Jeremy, thank you for joining me in the Comfy Chairs. I'd like to give you a moment so you can introduce yourself. Please and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, for having me on, and excited to be on the program. My name is Jeremy LaDuke, founder of Epic9 Marketing. We're a full-service marketing agency over in Maryville, Tennessee, and we've grown from just me to a team of about 16 folks right now.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I know you have a lot going on, and your background is really interesting and diverse to bring to this particular topic. And that's where I typically like to start is making certain that we're on the same page when we're talking about a particular thing. So where I would like us to begin is answering together that question of when leaders ask for team building interventions, what is it that we think they're actually trying to accomplish?
It's a great question. I can say from personal experience, I've never asked for a team building intervention. I feel like I have wanted to at times, but I knew enough to know that that's probably not the best route to go. But I think at the core of it, it's you're dealing with several different personalities. You're dealing with everything that's going on in these people's lives that are on your team. And sometimes it's just a lot to try to orchestrate as a leader. And you get to a point where you're just like, I don't know what the answer is.
With my background in human resources and learning and development, and this is something I talked about in the introductory moment, it was really common to get that call from a manager saying, I need you to come do team building. And 9 times out of 10, the issue wasn't the team. The issue was management. And not because the manager was ill-willed or not doing their job, but because they hadn't been taught how to craft their team, how to create that teamwork-rich environment. So even though I'm a little jaded and sardonic about team building, I think the fundamental issue is actually we don't prepare leaders to think this way. And so very often, the vast majority of times, when people are hired or promoted, they're intact teams where there are histories and issues and, like glory as well as failure that all preceded them. So how can people step into leadership roles or go into the office tomorrow and think about starting fresh when everything's already existing?
If you're stepping into it, if you're inheriting a team, um, that to me almost seems like at least you have an excuse, right? Like,
Yes.
I didn't build this. For me, on the other hand, like I crafted the team that we have from day one till now. So if there's anything wrong in this scenario, it's like, oh, I've got to answer for that.
Yeah.
I have been in situations though where I've inherited, I wouldn't say so much a team as a community.
Mm-hmm.
I shared in our previous conversations, work in the ministry.
Yeah.
And so working with a group of people that you're put with and said, hey, you've got to lead these folks. Um, I think the thing you got to do is just get to know each person on an individual level, at the start. And I think that's and sometimes you're not always, you don't have that privilege, but I think you have to, as much as you can, carve that out to build a relationship there, and understand what's happening not only in their work environment, but what's happened in their life, because
Mm-hmm.
that's going to affect their work as well.
Oh, that's exactly
Um,
right.
and just understand who is this person that is a building block in this organization. Um, and so I think that's step one. I mean, you can do some other things, but if you don't ever get to do that, then you're gambling.
Mm-hmm.
The other things might work, but there's a better chance than not that they're not going to until you form those relationships.
I agree. I think it's one of the failings of the modern workplace, I think, is there are so many assumptions made about what people know, what they should be capable of doing. Um, had a conversation in an earlier episode with a gentleman where we talked about accountability. And one of our problems as people are entering the workforce, we expect them to behave like professionals, but they've come out of usually school, right? Where everything is so clearly outlined for them. And when they struggle as new members of the workplace, we think it's because of will or lack of ambition or bad character, where in fact we haven't told them this is what we expect of you. And I think there's a proclivity among leadership these days because everyone's so busy and distracted to not even worry about telling established employees, your tenured people, this is what's expected of you. This is how we work together. One of the things I'm really fond of saying, I've said a lot, I think good managers end up getting bored of hearing themselves say the same things because they understand that because you have a team of people with different personalities, with competing priorities, with life happening, you're going to have to repeat messages multiple times through multiple channels and in different ways. And that constant communication, I think, is the through line that helps to build a team.
Yeah, and being intentional with it. One of the things that I learned that I had to start doing more systematically, as our team grew, was being very intentional, with that one-on-one time.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, it was pretty haphazard because we were a smaller team. It was it just kind of happened organically. But as we grew and there was less of that FaceTime with everybody, I had to become a lot more intentional with that one-on-one time. And I wouldn't say I've got it right at this point, but it's definitely better than it used to be. but having some sort of system where you're holding your as the leader, you're holding yourself accountable to do that and to be uh, face to face with each of your people um, is vital. I think
Hmm. I agree.
it
I really.
it's a chance for them to tell you if there are any grievances.
Mhm.
It's a chance to get that directly, because you're going to get it one way or the other.
Yes.
You're either going to get it directly in that first scenario, or it's going to build up and it's going to leak through other things, and you're going to find out about it later. And so just there's multiple reasons to do that, but I would say um, you to form your team and to make sure it's healthy, you got to be doing that.
It's interesting. There's a very fun kind of oxymoron in there. To build the team, you need one-on-one time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and so, what is that dynamic that individual relationships actually strengthen a collective relationship? And maybe what we're actually talking about is one of the practices that's important. So, before we get too far down that, one thing I want to do to avoid confusion is make a distinction between the type of team building that at least I am being sarcastic about, if you will,
like trust falls and yeah.
exactly, versus the process of building a team. And I think so much of it ends up being, do I see it as an activity or do I see it as a fundamental act of leading? Again, process oriented versus transactionally. So, how would you make that distinction yourself? What do you see the one being versus the other?
um I think there's probably is a space for more of that
Mm-hmm.
interventional type of role. um I've just have never experienced it. I don't think on a really intentional level. um but I imagine that there, when done well, it's very valuable. I could see that. But I think that without having, if you don't have that, then the leader needs to be doing, I think, some sort of exercises and um, uh, whether it's questions at every team meeting, or
Mm-hmm.
some sort of intentional process where you are um, kind of outlining and giving the cerebral side of team building, and putting that in their hands to say, this is why it's important that we do XYZ. This is why it's important that we trust each other. This is why it's important
Mm-hmm.
why we have a good argument, and those sort of things to build that trust. I'm a huge fan of five dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah.
I kind of tried to use that in about every team I've been a part of. Um, and we talk about it a lot and talk about, all right, the importance of just that base level. I care for you and I'm looking out for your best interest. Trust, the need for a good argument, all of
Mm-hmm.
those, that pyramid of those core facets of a good team. We try to talk about those and emphasize those on a regular basis. We recently went through, as a team, we read through Good to Great.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, old book. Some of the companies didn't really age too well in that book, but the core facets and how they wrote it, I think, still have a lot to teach about teams and making a great organization. Um, but I think one of the things that are you on the right bus? Are you in the right seat? Those were some hard conversations we had, and I think it gave the opportunity to make some changes in our organization while we were going through that process.
Another, well, we're kind of on the topic of books and resources. Another Lencioni, I never say it correctly. Um,
I think it's the Ch. I think it's Lencioni, but
Lencioni, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So apology, sir, Patrick. Um, Another resource of his is Six Types of Working Genius,
Hmm.
that is
Okay.
not just necessarily just about the team dynamic, but also individual um, abilities, capabilities, and designing your teams and the work so that you're filling in gaps for each other too. It's a
I'll
good
have to
one.
check that out. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that. Uh, I think those things are the, if I realize that I need to, tear everything down to the studs and start over,
Mm.
or I recognize that I need to course correct and make changes, those can be some really good tools for people. There are ways, I think, without having to do a reading assignment, if you will, without having to do homework, kind of to think intentionally about what makes for that team relationship and team dynamic that's effective, and what will get us there. And that's part of the reason I've never been a fan of the more activity or game oriented form of team building, because it doesn't always get the result that you want, which is about performance at the end of the day, right? Are we actually
Mm.
getting outcomes as a team? It tends to be, this is definitely going to be a soapbox moment. Please feel free to stop me, Jeremy.
Go for it.
I think so much of that type of activity has a bias toward extroversion, that we're asking everyone to behave as if they're outgoing and a type of bold that may not come naturally to them. We don't recognize that there may be things in that person's past. I'm pausing because I'm trying to think about how to appropriately talk about the concept of trauma informed workplaces.
Right.
That asking somebody to, let's pick on the classic trust fall. You don't know what's in that person's past and or in their psyche that may actually impede their ability to trust.
Yeah.
And so when we make it activity based as opposed to relationally based, we're potentially putting people in really uncomfortable positions and asking them to be entirely inauthentic. And I say this as an introvert that has had to do so many extroverted activities in the name of team building.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's painful. And I would be interested to see, is there any like actual scientific data that, oh, hey, falling backwards, into people's arms helps you trust them on a significant or meaningful level in the workplace. And hey, if the data says yes, it does, it's transformational, then heck yeah. But I think it's more of it's almost like a youth pastor making an object lesson type of thing, and
Yes.
saying, oh yeah, this is a great lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually has no effect. I think that's kind of where I feel it
Mm-hmm.
is. But I try to lean on data as much as possible. So if someone comes and says, nope, study after study shows you help someone climb over a wall, and a 10-foot wall, and that they perform better as a team, for a decade after. Um, I've never seen that
No,
before.
no. Well, and I think that's why, the outdoor courses, the ropes courses, the wall climbing. Um, when I think about the handful of experiences I've had around those, the parts that haven't been humiliating and uncomfortable, there's the difference between like a trust fall or a round of awkward icebreakers and something like getting over the wall. Not only is it how is it facilitated, it's the what are we focusing on in that? What is the motivation of it? If it's you need to do this because it will build trust, or this is something that is going to teach us how we work well together. I the graduate program that I attended really early on, we were put into the groups that were going to be our, our, because you do so much group work in a master's program. And then we went and did this obstacle course with each other, primarily in our groups. And they actually did, as much as I did not like it, I could see the benefit of it because they were very intentional about having us focus on shared problem solving. So it was about how we worked together. They positioned things about who could be good at this, who's going to need help with this. There was a wall climb, and it was, if you are not comfortable or capable, you do not have to participate. This is what, in the physical act, but you still have a part to play. So I'm not saying I enjoyed it, but that was the one time I saw the value because they did such a good job making it about how we learned to work together. And I think that's the distinction. If it's focused on the work, the desired outcome, do the wall climb, do the ropes course, but don't assume that the activity is going to get you what you want.
I think that's a great distinction. It's really a bit about the intention behind how it's led.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that applies to just, even if you're not doing those sort of things, you've got to be intentional with it, right? It's a great team isn't just going to happen. You don't just get the right people together and just it magically happens. Great teams need leaders, and I think a core part of that is finding the right people and having the right people on the team, and that's very hard. And I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way on that. And it's not that people are bad; they're not the right fit for what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, it's like you've got to be intentional with it, and everything that you try is not going to be a slam dunk, right? It's when I told everybody that we were going to do, a good to great and read this book, there were a lot of groans, and it may not have been the best way to do something like that. It probably could have been done better, but like you're going to try things. Some things are going to work, some things aren't. You revise it, try it again, and it's just an iterative process. And it's hard. It's not an easy task.
When you talked about things maybe not going according to plan, that there could have been a better way, you got me thinking, Jeremy, that anytime we're thinking about how do I build my team, how do I strengthen it, craft it, whatever language, and I tend to default to thinking about process and cycle. There's a before, a during, and after. We need to diagnose, what is it I actually need? Is it, I want my people to know each other better, so I'm just going to create a social opportunity? Is it, we're really failing in this one metric, there's an opportunity for us to, totally re-engineer how we do the work? Or is it, I really want to develop my people and give them the opportunity to learn these classic theories and concepts, whatever that looks like. And it's not, I'm not doing it like as a pro forma activity. It's with intent. So before I do something, what is the diagnostic part of that to understand what I'm trying to solve or build for? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it makes sense, right? I don't have any reason to think that another route, that just going about something without some sort of goal would be better. I mean, because if we don't have a goal, it's hard to measure, was this good, right? And even with a goal, it's still hard to measure, did this do the thing? What were some ancillary benefits from doing this thing? All of that. But I would say if you're not aiming at something, you'll hit it every time, right? So having a goal and that allows you to put a little bit more intention behind what you're doing. it also helps the team know what you're doing, like, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody wants just to go into an exercise or do a study or whatever with no goal in mind. It's just like because everybody's gonna be like, why are we doing this?
Hmm.
Why are we taking time? I've got work to do. I've got things to do. Why are we taking time to do this thing? And so kind of rallying the whole team around why you're doing it is important.
It's interesting, Jeremy. The thing that made me think of immediately was the concepts around adult learning principles that you may have some familiarity with just from your time in ministry, but there are, I'm going to embarrass myself by probably misquoting some of this. There are five adult learning principles established by a gentleman named Malcolm Knowles. And this is decades ago. They're, they play out whether we're talking about academic, personal learning, professional learning. One of the very first things that adult learners need is to feel respected. That because we are not children, in a classroom, I'm not a first grader, I'm not a kindergartner, I'm an adult professional, somebody who's being paid to be here, respect my time, my knowledge, and my experience. And it's in the workplace especially, we have to make certain it connects to the work. This is what you're doing and how you're going to make use of it back on the job. And that's what you're talking about. So if I'm going to do something like we're all going to read the same book together and discuss it, it's not because I went to a conference and encountered this book and I'm really excited about it. It's because it augments what you already know. You're adults. You've done this work. It's adding to your knowledge, and here's how we're going to make use of it as a team. You'll be able to, go back to the office tomorrow and apply what we discussed. That is, and obviously that is the ideal state. But for leaders that are thinking about, I want to do something that's activity oriented for my team, don't think of it just as a good idea. Think of it as something that directly honors your people where they are and connects back to the work with direct application.
I think it's a great way to think about it.
I think something that's important to cover in this topic is how you onboard new people. You've had that growth of going from a handful to now being in the double digits with your team. Every time we add someone, it's both a mandate and an opportunity to integrate, but also construct how that new process and environment and collaborative relationship will work. In your experience, since it's something that you've been doing over the last few years, growing your team and your business, what has worked well, and what have been some of the lessons that you've learned, the things that haven't been as great?
I think the things that we've put in place that have helped are just processes. And this not only helps the people that are getting onboarded, it helps the whole team. But having SOPs and having some processes, we don't have a book of them, but we have enough to do what we need to do efficiently. And I think that's a balance too, right? Like you don't want to overwhelm people with minutia and details about how they're supposed to do X, Y, Z. Um, but you need enough to say, all right, this is when we don't do it this way, things go off track. So um, having that in place, and that's something that our one of our project managers like really was intentional with a few years ago, and it took us a few months to kind of work through all of the things we do and kind of line out that process. So it's a good reference for anybody coming on board to say, okay, hey, this is how we do these things, and it gives them some sort of source of truth to go back to if they ever need it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is just really as clear of instructions as you can give folks for on all of the little things. The devil's in the details, and helping people understand, like, this is how we use this software. This is how, this is what it's expected of you at these meetings, those sort of things. Having that all lined out as much as possible, I think is ideal. And that's more on I think on the technical side. On the more personal side, um, being able to have some interaction with other team members in a non-work setting, I think has been helpful for us. Just today, you and a couple of the team are going to go out for lunch, that sort of thing, and just to have some time where it's not solely focused on work. And I think also when we're talking about team building and games and activities, I think sometimes the things that help are just completely non-work related at all, that are just intended for fun. Just have fun together.
Yes.
And that's a great way to build that trust and uh, uh, rapport with each other. It doesn't always work out like that, but ideally, you have moments where you can just enjoy people as other human beings and not as coworkers, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's it's something to note. But we don't have a super rigorous onboarding system. Some places probably need and require that for what we do. Uh, we're a little bit more flexible, so we don't have a super rigorous onboarding system. But we do have a fairly structured way we work once you're in the routine.
Yeah. I think whether you have 16 employees or 60,000, the scale may be significantly different, but the truths are the same. That you do need to have some standardization, that you do need to have both the technical aspects of working here, but also the personal aspects of working here. And understanding we're human beings together is so important. So even if somebody has a team of 2, there are things that you can do that are foundational, and they work whether I'm engaging, in my triad, or if I'm engaging, with a dispersed team that's global and numbers in the hundreds.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely a balance to that between, all right, the relationship side and the, get work done side. And I have, and partly because of, I think, my background, I have leaned and been a little bit more biased towards the relationship side. And I've had to learn to, as quickly and as directly as I can, just emphasize that we're here to get a job done, right? If we don't get this job done, the whole thing falls apart, right? If we're not making money, this whole thing falls apart. And so, and and what you do, your actions, your punctuality on things, the quality of your work, it affects the whole team, right? If you're not paddling your side of the boat, the way you need to, someone else is going to be having to paddle harder because you're not. And so that's I would say to anybody else that's out there that kind of leans towards that relationship side, like, save yourself some heartache and pain and tackle those issues up front.
I come from the other side of that.
Yeah.
Where not relational very early on in my career. I mean, when I was a frontline employee, tried to build relationships, but very introverted, very much like more left brain than right brain. In the Myers-Briggs parlance, I'm an INTJ, so thinking and judging and logic. And when I entered leadership, I was very task driven. And I can look back now at those those unfortunate people that had me as their boss. I was rigorous and I was structured, but I wasn't gentle, and I didn't try to connect because we were there to do a job. And through lots of mistakes, and I think a little bit of the mellowing that comes with age, and having some very good role models, fortunately, in my life, I've come to that understanding that the relationship is the conduit for getting work done when you're in leadership. And if you don't foster that, and you don't also help your people connect to each other, you're not going to be able to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's two sides of the same coin, for sure.
Yeah.
It reminds me though of, have you ever seen the little description of the 60 different personality types, and how they would tell someone that they're going to get executed?
Oh, I don't think I've seen
It's
that one, but I can
Yes,
I
it's
can imagine
fascinating.
it.
So I got it pulled up here.
Uh-huh.
It's sorry, but you have to die, and it's all the different ways that the different personality types would tell people that. And
Okay.
for an INTJ would say, I cannot comprehend why someone hasn't executed you yet.
Oh, that is unfortunately accurate. Because I have already judged and found you wanting.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, you said
I think mine was the I waffle between a couple of them. I think it's INFJ maybe. Is that one?
Yeah,
Is that a thing?
it is.
I'm looking for it. Yeah, there we go. Oh, it's your execution will teach others a valuable lesson.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yep. Oh, that's magnificent.
I'll send that to you so
Thank
you can.
you. I appreciate that because yeah, that's I know the Myers-Briggs type sometimes gets a bad rap. Um, but I think
I think it's helpful to like for people to understand each other.
that's
Um,
exactly it. It's the
and
common
it's
language that's
yes,
so important.
it's funny, and it does break down some barriers, I think, because
Hmm.
when you look at someone and say, oh, they're not a jerk, it's just the way they're wired. Like
Right.
they talk like this because it's just the way they're wired, and it helps you understand that like the things that you may have interpreted one way,
Hmm.
you get this a little bit of a new paradigm to say, okay, maybe I didn't interpret this the right way. So those can be helpful, but yeah,
Well,
they generalize a lot, but
yeah. I think if it's
yeah.
done again, we've kind of stumbled into something that could be very activity based, but is a pretty common team building practice, whether it's personality assessments or behavioral assessments. There's a whole raft of what those can look like. In fact, the workshop that I'm doing on Friday is an everything disc, Agile EQ debrief with a team. And fortunately, I'm able to do it where we're going to focus on you, but we're also going to focus on the team and the work that you do, the people that you serve. And the drive is of that time with each other is to get to what is the plan of action? How do you apply this to your relationships with each other and to the people that you serve? The goal is to develop deeper understanding of ourselves and each other so that we can get work done. You can effectively and in a way, like you said, have fun. That becomes a valuable activity to do. It's odd. The more we talk about this, Jeremy, I feel like I am inadvertently kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth where I'm like, team building is awful. I'm like, oh, these are things that could be really valuable in team building. One, I want to confess that, but I also kind of want to put out there that it's not that black and white as somebody like myself is tempted to make it. What do you
Right.
think?
Yeah. No, I think everything's gray, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that's a fair way to think about it.
My stance is, again, it's not a team building problem, it's a leadership problem. That is my bias in this space. And I think one could say those are one and the same things in some ways.
Mm.
But the fact of the matter is sometimes teams, even if they've been high performing, sometimes they go off the rails. It happens because of everything we've talked about before, personalities and priorities and external pressures. In your experience, what are some of the signs to watch for to try to circumvent derailment? Is that something that you've encountered in your experience?
Um, I won't know if I would label it as a full derailment, but
Okay.
I mean, it's the tracks have definitely gotten, it's gotten a little wobbly, I
Okay.
think. But I would say the signs when that, um, and this is more, I think, of an effect of it rather than a cause, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But when things when due dates start
Mm,
slipping, right?
yep.
When that's a clear sign to me that something's not going right, right? There's some kinks in the gears. And that may be a lack of motivation. It has been, I think, in some situations, or it may just be that our processes, we are not kind of following our processes, and we're not setting our expectations correctly. And so, but I think it can definitely, that sort of stress on the team can puts a heavy weight on the whole team. And the things that were, maybe minor at one point, all of a sudden feel major, right? And it's just like stress in our lives, right? When things are great, and you're healthy and your bank account's good, and blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, the small, you don't really sweat the small stuff, but
Yeah.
when other things start, the stressors start coming in, the small things feel a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same way with your team, is when everything's good, you don't necessarily notice all those little rough spots. Um, but when things start getting stressful, then everything feels stressful, right? And so there have been those times, and I think it's the best way I can think of, and the best way I think I've led through those times, is just to sit back and say, all right, we're in this situation. How do we get out of it? What's our plan going forward? Rather than, is it a hard conversation we need to have with a client? Is it a hard conversation I need to have with a team member? You've got to sit down and, address the fact that you're in the situation you're in before you can really find a clear path forward. And that just, I think that requires some vulnerability and some humility sometimes. I think if you, as a leader, if you go into it and you're like, well, we're in this position because of, so and so, that is not setting yourself up for success. But if you go into it with humility and say, listen, I did not see this coming. I should have, been better prepared myself. I should have prepared y'all better. So how do we deal with this now? I think in those situations, having that leadership level of humility is very important.
Talking about things like missing deadlines and trying to diagnose and recognize, is it because of teamwork? Is it because of leadership and expectations? You got me thinking, Jeremy. My soapbox on this topic is that team building is a process. Processes are made up of moments, though. And I do think that there are some key moments that leaders, that managers need to be very aware of and not miss the opportunities to build and craft their teams. Um, I have an idea of what some of those can be, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Um, what we've tried to do is recognize the obvious moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
The birthdays, the work
Yeah.
anniversaries, those sort of things. I think those are, it's important to that's the bare minimum, right?
Yes.
Other moments, I think being very intentional about finding when to celebrate people is important. And it's not necessarily easy all the time, right? And so you've got to work to find those opportunities to celebrate people, and not make it seem patronizing as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the things that some people do might not be as grandiose as other the things other people do, and so finding a way to celebrate, even the most mundane things that your team is doing is important,
Mm-hmm.
to some extent.
There's a distinction, very subtle probably, between recognition and celebration.
Mm.
Um,
No, it's, yeah,
recognizing,
that's a great distinction.
yeah. Well, it's like service, years of service.
Yeah.
I'm going to acknowledge, we're going to, memorialize the fact that you've been here a year, you've been here 10 years, 30, 50. Um, that doesn't necessarily speak to the person's performance, though, or how they functioned as a team. So acknowledging the service is very different than celebrating, recognizing when somebody has put a lot of effort into personal professional development or change. And I think leaders will do themselves a service by being, well, intentional all the time, but very intentional about when am I making certain I don't miss the moment for something that should be acknowledged, like a birthday, like an anniversary date. When am I recognizing efforts and contributions, and when am I celebrating victory,
Hmm.
whether it's team or individual? And to your point, I think opportunities for celebration is one of the moments where you can either cement the team's, integrity, if you will, the structure, the foundation, or you can miss it and chip away at it.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
maybe the question is it goes back, one step is, are you setting not only the whole team, but the individual people, are you setting them up for moments where they can be celebrated?
Yeah.
Are you putting uh, opportunities for them, to do big things,
Mm-hmm.
in their path? So, um, that's just kind of a spark that I just had in this conversation. So
Hooray.
I'm gonna try to implement that and think through that,
Yeah.
after we get off here. Um, but yeah, I think it's a matter of are you being intentional with, giving them opportunities to be celebrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then not missing the opportunity when life happens too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those moments that I think leaders don't want to miss. There's obviously the moment when you become the manager of a team, whether it's the first person you hire, or when you get promoted, or when you're hired into an existing team. You are setting, like, you're pouring the foundation of what that's going to look like. If I can really push the metaphor of building or architecture to the point of breaking, but that's where you pour your foundation, is when you first become the leader, whatever the circumstances. And then anytime the composition of the team changes through the addition, when we hire new people, are we being very careful about how they're integrated? Are we celebrating the fact that we've been able to include somebody new, that we've added skills, abilities, this person's experience and their history, their whole personality? When people leave, regardless of the circumstances, that changes your composition, and that's an opportunity
Yeah.
to either annex something, to patch it, whatever you have, but letting those things pass you by, is going to eventually impact the overall team performance. I think there's also, um, anytime you have major changes, obviously, uh, that is an opportunity to reset, and figure out how can we be stronger under these new circumstances. You mentioned birthdays. I also think, I don't know that birthdays are necessarily what I would classify as a significant personal moment, because it's not something we necessarily chose for ourselves. But when people on the team have something like, on the joyful side, a marriage or a birth, a graduation, or when they have maybe a significant loss, during times of bereavement, those are opportunities to be human beings together, even though it's not necessarily directly, one could argue, not directly work related, but it's still letting us see each other as human. I also think, where we talked about celebration, there are opportunities when things don't go well, too, when we have failures or there's a significant mistake. In healthcare, where, in the unfortunate events where there was like a safety event, what we called a sentinel event, and there was a need to do investigations and try to determine how do we prevent, whether it was an error or an accident or an undesired outcome from occurring again. There is stress that happens on the team that, if not addressed, will create cracks in how the team functions with each other. So those are opportunities to get in and build your team as well. I think, even though I started this with talking about it's not an activity, it's not an event, it's a process, it's actually kind of both. The process involves certain activities and opportunities to intentionally spend those moments doing things that may be icebreakers, that may be trust falls. Likely not, but they could be.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I think it's activities and events alone don't make great team building, but it really is the intention and the goals behind those things. Still might not make great team building, but at least you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
At least it's a start. So yeah.
That's such a good point in and of itself, Jeremy. Start. Yeah, maybe it will fall flat. Maybe people will respond like your team did to the one book. Maybe it won't be great, but this goes to that process piece. There's the before, let me diagnose. There's the during, the thing I'm doing, and I'm watching to see if it's having the desired results that I want from it. But then there's an after, and that's ask for feedback. Did this work for you all? Would you want to do it again? This is what we tried to accomplish. Did we? Make certain that the team has a voice in it, because it doesn't have to all be you, leader.
It's a great point.
And if it didn't go well, what did we learn? But just start. Just do something.
Yeah. It's not, I think people just need to understand it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be far from perfect.
Yes.
The first time you do it. But compared to not doing anything, it's pretty dang great.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, and it may be great the first 50 times, and the 51st it falls flat, and that's okay. That's okay. We all learn from things that don't go well, and if nothing else, maybe you get a good story out of it.
Yeah.
And this actually, that is an important part of team building, is what are the stories we tell ourselves about our team.
Yep.
I'm interested, because your background is marketing. That's something that you have kind of a sweet spot in, that the stories we tell, that creates team.
It does. And I think this is probably a whole other podcast episode here, but I think the narratives in your workplace
Mm-hmm.
are significant, or their impact is significant, right? And I've when I sense a negative narrative, I try to kind of steer it in the opposite direction, as much as I can without, being heavy-handed with it. But it's one of those things that, like, you can, like, when a great narrative comes about, that's empowering, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if there's a great narrative behind your team, like, we do great work, we love what we do, those sort of things, that's empowering. But when there's a narrative about the team as a whole or about a particular person, that can be, you don't want to pigeonhole people,
Mm-hmm.
or the team, and it can affect people's motivation and morale and everything. So I think that the stories and the narratives that are in the workplace are very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that goes back to the question I asked you about, sometimes teams go off the rails. What are some of the signs to watch for? What stories are you hearing?
Yeah,
What are the
yeah,
stories the team is telling?
yeah. And some are, I think it's going to be natural, and there's no way to stop the funny little quirky stories,
Mm-hmm.
but it's when it has a direct impact, or it says something about the quality of work or the quality of person,
Mm-hmm.
um, that somebody is, or that the team is. Then that's where it's like, what can we do to change that narrative? Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. If the stories don't line up with what the purpose of the team is, its mission, its values, we could go
yeah,
through the whole kind of standard litany of businessy elements.
yeah.
But if
And
those
there's been,
stories start
yeah,
to fall out of alignment, if there's dissonance, that's a big old red flag. Figure out
yeah.
what's
And I mean,
happening.
and there have been times where I've had to have direct conversations and say, is this the way you really feel about what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
The sentiment here is not great. Is that how you really feel? Why? Um, and I've had to ask some people at one time to, let's, in these conversations and in these meetings, if you can help kind of steer it this way, it would
Mm-hmm.
benefit the whole team. Because nobody on a team is benefited by a negative narrative.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, but I think as a leader, you also have to look at, like, okay, is there truth to this narrative, and how do we fix that?
Yeah.
And that could be a hard conversation, a hard uh, realization as well.
You've called out um, one of the practices, I think, leaders who are looking to be more intentional. It's identifying not just the thing, but also the people behind or around it. Every team, regardless of its size, is going to have people that have more influence than others. And deliberately, planfully engaging with those influencers, not to manipulate by any stretch, but to use them as kind of a bellwether or like a weather vane to understand where we pointed, how are we going, and making certain that they're either on board or they aren't going to be disruptive. Um, to make certain that the team is being influenced the way that it needs to be can be really important. Things like, hey, Joe, I understand you're not happy with this. Let's sit down and work on what it's going to take for you to not necessarily be doing, cartwheels about it, but that when we're in meetings, you're able to be supportive
Yeah,
because you have influence.
yeah. It's like, you don't have to be excited. Just don't be a, negative Nancy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, don't be a Debbie Downer.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to your team building as a leader starts with your one-on-one relationships. Do I know this person? Do I understand? Am I able to have those very direct conversations respectfully and compassionately with them?
I just realized, like, I know when I go back and I'm listening to this podcast later, I just use negative Nancy and Debbie Downer in one blurb, and those are like, I just dawned on me, those are like two negative female
Hmm.
names. Like, is there a male equivalent? Is there something out there uh
Uh,
Davy Downer? I don't
maybe
know,
there,
but I
that's,
I apologize for the
well, one, thank you.
pushing a negative narrative out there. Um,
Yeah.
so
Hats off to you for recognizing that in the moment. Um, Thank you for calling it out. Uh, and yeah, that is, here's another
well,
thing that we can do is
well,
not.
it goes to the narratives that we talk
Hmm.
about, right? And that those are narratives, like those are parts of narratives
Right.
that I unfortunately just strengthened. And hopefully I'm pulling back a little bit. So please keep this in the final episode. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, even the little things, right? Like
Hmm.
those are the little elements of the narrative in your workplace. When if you let those things live too long, they're like weeds, right? If you
Yeah.
let them live too long, like they're gonna choke out the healthy plants. And so,
Hmm.
um, you know, getting rid of them as quickly as possible is
Yeah.
a good way to do it. But
Yeah.
again, you can't like, it's a fine line. It's a
Hmm.
art, not a science. Yeah, no, and it happens.
Hmm.
You get a group of people together long enough, or a big enough group of people together for a short
Exactly.
amount of time, somebody's going to say something that is
Yeah.
insensitive, or
Oh yeah.
triggers something, and you can't escape it
Yeah.
100%. But how you respond to it is very important.
Exactly. Well, and also understanding, like, there's a difference between I was careless or I was cruel.
Yeah. Mm.
Because I'm definitely not advocating for, if somebody says, a catchphrase or an idiom or something that can prick at someone else, you don't want to come down on them. But it's watching those one on one relationships between the people that look to you for leadership and understanding where cracks may be developing and then addressing them, not the whole team.
Yeah, that's I think is a great point. It's something I've tried. I've caught myself at times not doing this correctly. But I think it's something I shoot for, is when problems are spotted, talking specifically to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, the whole team is sitting there wondering, am I the one? Is it him, or is it her? Is it
Well,
me?
that's
And so
best case, I feel. Like, worst
yeah.
case is, Kate, what are you talking about? We all know that this is Jane that does
Oh, yeah.
this. Why are you taking time for us to have to listen to your lecture?
Yeah.
And you can't you can't lead, but you certainly can't team build if you're undercutting your own credibility that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We've Unfortunately, we've probably all been either present or, yikes, many of us have probably done that.
Yeah.
To your point, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah. And it really, I mean, there's nobody's got a perfect running
Mhm.
as a leader, like,
Yeah.
but it's really I think how you respond on the backside of to those mistakes and to those
Mhm.
things that's important.
Yeah. I think when I think about this whole topic, in some ways, it's not necessarily the what you do, because every team is going to be different. Every team is made up of people that are different from each other. Sometimes you do need to do the more activity based. Sometimes you need to do things that are highly technical, sometimes things that are very personal. What matters is having the mindset as the person managing that group of folks that I am responsible for the structure of the team, for what has been built and is being built. And then just try stuff. See how it works and get the team engaged in it.
if you've got some party loving extroverts on your team, then go climb some walls and do some spider webs or whatever those things are called.
Yeah. But yeah,
Fall into each other's arms.
yep. Let them plan the parties, right? And let
Yes.
the introverts know that they only have to show up for 20 minutes. Yeah. And the people that love it will love it. And then you find something for the people that don't. You
Yep.
just keep trying. One of the things I've really enjoyed about this conversation, Jeremy, is I feel like both of us have had these moments of, oh, I said this thing, and that may not actually be, that may not be the best. Like you with your narratives, and I realized, like, no, I actually think some of the traditional team building stuff is wildly effective. Yikes! I need to change my song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. So as we're wrapping up, I always like to ask if there are any kind of last thoughts, big ideas, key takeaways that you'd want to share to help us close our circle, close our loop.
I mean, I think the key thing in all of this as a leader is like um you've got to have more humility than the average person.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you're not gonna have a good time. You might not have a good time either way, but you're gonna have a worse time if you bring a lot of ego and pride into it.
Yeah.
But I think no matter what you're doing, do it with the sense of one, you don't have all the answers. You're um, you know you're coming to it with a finite perspective, um, and to understanding that you can get better at it, but it just takes some courage and it takes some um, vulnerability to get out there and do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's no leader is perfect. No team is perfect. The goal is to get better
Yep.
at how you lead and how your team works with each other. Yeah, excellent. So, sir, I know that you have some pretty big stuff going on from our earlier conversations. You've recently published a book. I would love to give
Yeah.
you the chance to talk about that. And I know that you've got some other things on the horizon that I want to give you a chance to share with us. Please.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Well, yeah, the book has nothing to do with leadership whatsoever. It's
Just
about
perfectly fine.
yeah, which it's about well, it's really a trail guide. I like to call it a trail guide
Okay.
for marketing for local businesses. It's called Climb, the risks and rewards of elevating your brand, and it's really a how-to manual for a local business. And I say local rather than small because there are a lot of businesses that could be technically be called small businesses, under 500 employees or under a certain revenue, that aren't necessarily don't have a huge footprint or impact in their local community. This book is targeted towards businesses that are invested in and they have that symbiotic relationship with a local community.
Okay.
And so it goes through all of the things that they'll need to know about marketing, about branding, about um, setting goals for your marketing and what tactics to use. And it does it in what I like to call a business narrative type of way. So it walks through the story of a local business owner having to do these things. So you really get kind of an inside look at like what does this actually look like and how does this look day to day for a business. Chances are you're not going to be a book and toy store owner like this person in the book is. But you can take those principles and those things and apply them to your situation. So yeah, the book is called Climb. You can get it at theclimb.guide. All the links to places are out there. It's on Amazon, and I always say if you must get it on Amazon, but I really do encourage people to get it from bookshop.org that supports local businesses, that supports
yeah.
local bookstores. And the links are all on theclimb.guide. And also, if someone that is out there listening, you're a local business owner and you don't have a huge budget to hire a marketing agency, we have launched the Climb Club. It's loosely based on the book, but it's really a way, a community for local businesses, local business owners to get together to say, here are resources that you can easily implement into your business to help you market yourself and help brand yourself better. So there are tutorials, there's forums. We do a weekly kind of an ask me anything type of Q&A. And so if you need help with your marketing, but you're not at that position where you can spend, $2,000 or $3,000 a month to hire an agency, this is a great stepping stone for you to get there.
That's great. There are,
and they can get to that at theclimbclub.com.
Okay.
So
theclimbclub.com. And I'll make certain that all of those links are in our show notes, that people can access them easily. Yeah, and anything else that you want to make certain that we get out there, Jeremy, please share that with me. Oh, it's exciting work. I know that I've had the opportunity in the last year, having started my own business, to meet a lot of small business owners. And that's something most of us end up talking about, is learning the marketing side of things can be such a challenge if it's not your area of specialty. So it's exciting to hear that you're doing that for the smaller local businesses as well.
Yeah, I know we need it. It's an ever-changing landscape. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in it all the time, if you're not in it every day, it's hard to know where to start sometimes. And so the book really kind of sets the foundation, I think. The Climb Club is that ongoing, not only technical support, but also that community support, where you can ask other people who are in similar situations what's worked for you, and get input from them as well.
That's great. It's really exciting. I look forward to you being able to impact a lot of people.
That's the goal. It's the hope.
Excellent. Good. Great. Well, thank you so much. I have really appreciated the time that you've given us. Thank you for joining me.
It's been a great conversation, and I have gotten a lot out of it.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I have as well. I hope you have a wonderful evening, sir.
Thank you. You too.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.